Recording in progress.
Okay, so we are now recording, and I would like to welcome everybody on behalf of TCC Hawaii Learning Times and the Learning Design and Technology Department to the beginning of our LTech Masters student presentations this evening. This is going to be a 20-minute presentation, and we are recording, so it will be available. I'm going to let Sawyer introduce himself and his project. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sawyer. Sawyer,
Thank
are
you for
you
that,
on
Dr.
mute?
Airy.
Okay,
I think I'm unmuted. I'm going to go ahead
there
and
we
get
go.
started then. Alrighty, so hello and welcome everyone to my TCC presentation. I want to thank all of you for joining me today, and I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to share my story with you. So my project is called Parents and Podcasts, providing computer science awareness to elementary school parents via podcasting. So I'll get back to how we ended up here in a minute, but first let's talk about why I started this project and a little bit about myself. So, my name is Sawyer. Hello, that's me. I'm a master's candidate in the Learning Design and Technology program at UH Manoa. And while I have a lot of interest in the education space, my background is formally in computer engineering, in software development. And as I studied and worked in technology, I noticed that what I'd learned in school was not quite keeping up with the industry standard. Technology is advancing rapidly, and education is traditionally very slow moving. With few exceptions, we teach our kids the same algebra, the same Civil War, the same Shakespeare. School subjects don't change very often, but the way we use computers changes every few years. There's always a new app or a new groundbreaking tool. So my big point is there's a big disconnect between technology and education, and that's something I wanted to take a look at. So allow me to formally introduce my problem. There's a big computer science demand, but low participation. Computer science jobs are some of the highest paying jobs and are predicted to grow in the next 10 years. And if you want to enter this workforce, we'd love to have you. But not everyone needs to be an engineer or a coder to benefit from computer science. We're seeing an increased need for computer literacy, adaptability in software usage, and many non-tech jobs are starting to require a baseline usage of computer tools to perform their jobs at their best. Think simple stuff, like adding automation to make email templates, or create a script to add tax and shipping to an invoice. You can save yourself hours of your time and boost your productivity. So while education is improving overall in the United States, despite that computer science jobs pay very well, and despite the increasing demand for technology education in every industry, I noticed that Hawaii is lagging behind, and that's where I want to focus my attention. I'm just a graduate student after all. I'm not going to solve this massive tech problem with a one-man project. So let's dial in on something I can change, or at least move the needle in the right direction. So I did some research, and I noticed there's a powerful correlation between early interest and the willingness to pursue difficult subjects. If a student starts early and gets the proper support, then they're more likely to continue even though it's challenging. And I thought I can work with that. So let's see what I can do. So I did some more digging, and I stumbled upon an interesting change that is very relevant and recent. I found that the Hawaii Senate has mandated that all public schools, grades K through 12, must offer computer science classes by this next school year, this fall in 2024. And this is really great for our kids. We're going to start to see computer science curriculum in elementary schools as separate classes, but also integrated into existing ones. We've seen success in teachers mixing subjects. For example, a social studies teacher can teach both Hawaiian studies and computer science by using petroglyphs and programming simple animations to tell stories. There's some fascinating work being done here, and this is great news, but I bet a lot of parents don't know what's going on in this particular space. And that brings me to my solution. Many parents, including caretakers of children, foster parents, mentors, role models, etc., who I'm all including in this phrase, I'm just going to clump them for this presentation. Many parents may have a surface level understanding of computer science and generally know it's important. However, many parents are left in the dark, unaware of what computer science is and how it will affect their children. I want to improve parental support for computer science students. Now follow along this logic and let's work backwards. By educating parents, I can increase parental support for computer science students, which will in turn increase early interest, and finally, hopefully, improve the participation rates academically and professionally. So as an instructional designer, in order to solve this problem, I wanted to create some kind of instruction that can accomplish these two goals. 1. To raise parental awareness of computer science and the benefits to the children learning it. And 2. Provide guidance on how parents can better support their children at home. So I mentioned before that I'm a learning design student. And in order to accomplish my goal, there's a certain process I have to go through. And there are many variations of this model, but it looks something like this. There are 5 main steps: analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. And you can, in theory, go around and around, improving your solution each time. But for this project, I went around one full time, and I will be sharing with you how I tackled each of these in my presentation. I already covered the problem analysis, so let's continue with the design. Let me walk you through the journey of my project through this model. So I've shared with you my instructional goals, but let's break that down even further. What specific things do I want my learners to be able to do after taking my instruction? So this is called a hierarchy chart, and it's one way of organizing performance objectives. I have my main goal, or my terminal objective, at the top, and all the sub-steps required to attain that goal underneath. If all the sub-goals are met, then the terminal objective, I can say that's met as well. In this case, the terminal objective is a combination of my 2 goals from the previous slide. And if I want to accomplish this large goal, I have to start from the bottom and work my way up. So for example, if I want you to be able to identify the benefits of computer science, you also have to be able to define it, to tell me what it is. So you can see why it's really important to map out, because if I want to teach something, it becomes very logical on where to start. Visualizing it this way and working from the bottom to the top, the lesson basically plans itself out. So if you remember the title of this talk, it's called Parents and Podcasts. And so yes, after all this planning and research, I decided to create a podcast as my instructional vehicle to deliver these promises. So the next question is, why? And there are many reasons for this. The first reason is my target audience is parents. And that means I have a wide reach. Parents are a very diverse audience. They have varying ages and cultural backgrounds. And I wanted to make this project as accessible to as many people as possible. Podcasting is a great way to do that. A second reason is that parents are very busy people. They likely don't have time to attend class or participate in online activities. A podcast is thankfully hands-free and commitment-free. It can be listening to while doing chores around the house. So while you're packing your kids' lunch, driving, working out, a podcast is something that can be easily slotted into a schedule without having to dedicate time. And the third reason is that parents generally enjoy podcasts. So let's take a little step back and humor me in this group participation activity. So everyone listening, please, I would like for you to open up the Zoom chat and tell me 2 things. 1, if you have kids or have worked with kids in the past, yes or no. And 2, 1 or 2 emojis of how you might feel after spending a whole day with kids without any breaks whatsoever. So yes or no and a couple of emojis. There we go. So I see some funny faces in chat, but please continue to do so as I continue my presentation. I think we'll all agree that we love kids, but it can be very exhausting to look after them all day. So why do parents enjoy podcasts? Well, it can be a great way for just a brief moment to be transported to another world or headspace after a long day. It's a good break. Parents enjoy being able to take this break, but also feeling productive and sharing what they learn with their friends. So I'll cover this part briefly, but a podcast also aligns with my instructional strategies. It's informal learning and the adult learning theory. These essentially mean that adults prefer to learn casually and prefer to learn about topics that directly affect them. Adults prefer when they can use what they learn readily in the context of their own life. I'll get back to this. So that covers my motivation and design decisions. And with that, I can move on to the development and implementation. So I'd like to show you a little bit about what I created. So here you can see is a screenshot of the final version of the website I created that houses the podcast. You can see there's the podcast play button on the bottom and some carefully selected culturally relevant images. I went with a cozy campfire local vibe, and the goal was to be very casual and inviting. I wanted to create a safe space, a safe environment where everyone is welcome and encouraged to learn. The podcast is titled The Different Way, and it talks about how computers change education and how computers change the way we do things. So the podcast has 3 main segments. Why is computer science taught in elementary schools? What is and isn't computer science? And how I can foster interest in my child to learn computer science. If you scroll down the site a little bit, Here's a screenshot of what you would see. I wanted to keep it very simple and basic so that anyone could find and use this, but I just wanted to also give a couple of headlines to give a little context about what the podcast is all about, which is everything I'm going to explain to you in this presentation. So I think I've sufficiently hyped up my project, and I think now is a perfect time to give a little taste of the podcast. The whole thing's about 20 minutes, so I can only share a small sampler, but I've linked the podcast website here if you're interested in listening to it later. It's going to be a little weird because I've been talking for about 10 minutes, and it's going to be another recording of me talking, but bear with it for now. And for a minute or so, please enjoy. And also give me a thumbs down or something if the audio is not working. I mentioned that computer science jobs are about creating websites and apps, like Instagram and Google Maps. But computer science isn't limited to working for a big tech company. There are a lot of local issues, big and small, and many of them can be solved with the help of computer science. It's becoming more important to build the next generation that is not only just aware of issues in Hawaii, but also understands the tools they have at their disposal to analyze the important things close to home. Whether it be ocean conditions, tourism, or native wildlife, there are many things that we can work on to make a positive difference for the future of our islands together. Part of this is using computer science and doing things the different way. Let's take a look at an example. A few years ago, the University of Hawaii at Hilo hosted a competition, and they awarded $10,000 to the winner. Hawaii is home to many native birds, and it is important to protect them. In some ways we can do this is by tracking their populations and migration patterns. The problem is it's really hard and expensive to do this. The winner of the competition was able to come up with an algorithm that uses AI. The program listens to bird songs and can identify which birds they came from. And now, by placing microphones throughout the state, we can automatically collect data about birds, where they are, where they're coming from, and where they're going. I love this example because it highlights a very specific issue that shows just how a few people can make a huge difference. I think it cut out at the end, but that's okay. So I know that was short, but I hope you can see the vibe I was going for and some of the instructional strategies in action. Unfortunately, I have to move on, but please feel free to listen and share later. If you recall what I mentioned about adult learning theory, it says that adults prefer to use what they can learn readily in the context of their own life. It was difficult to come up with some sort of interactivity in a podcast that is typically a one-sided conversation. And in order to facilitate this, I came up with the idea to introduce a topic and then periodically ask my listeners to reflect. And after giving them some ample thinking time, as they sit quiet and listen to the crackle of the campfire, that opens up the floor for the narrator to break it down and discuss the topic in more detail. I also made sure to provide many real-world examples, like the AI birdsong story, to give ideas about where the computer science can help improve your life on a personal level. Again, adults don't like to be preached to about some esoteric world-level issue. What matters is what you can do right now. So that concludes the development and implementation of my project. Let's move on to the evaluation. Now that I got the podcast, I need to test it. So I have a few main goals here, like making sure it's usable, free from major problems, and that people found it useful. And to do that, here's my evaluation plan. After recruiting some participants, phase 1 starts with a pilot test. It's a small-scale test of 3 people, and the goal is to just put it in front of people and see what they think. This was a great way to iron out all the kinks before sending it to a larger audience. So after one round of revisions, I was ready for the full-scale evaluation in phase 2. This consisted of 20 participants, and I had them take a pre-survey, listen to the podcast, and then a post-survey. And with this data, I could learn a little bit about the demographics of my audience and see some changes before and after. Let's take a look at some of the results. I'd just like to briefly preface that this is just a sample of the data, and the full reports can be found in my paper. I wanted to collect 4 pieces of data: demographics, learning effectiveness, attitudinal changes, and just some general feedback. What do they think? So starting off with the demographics, 85% of my participants live or have lived in Hawaii, which is good because I'm targeting locals, but I get a little out-of-state perspective too. Half my participants currently raise or work with children, but that number goes up to 70% if you include empty nesters or those who are retired. And here you can see an age distribution. I've got somewhat distributed range, but 35 to 55 is the average age of a parent that would have an elementary school kid. So I think this is roughly a good enough sample to test my podcast. Let's take a look at the learning effectiveness results. I had 9 multiple choice questions on my survey, which each correlates to a performance objective. So here's the hierarchy chart I showed earlier. These objectives one-to-one correlate with some performance objectives. So for example, identifying the benefits of computer science education, defining the core concepts, and selecting one learning resource. So overall, the test scores improved by an average of 29%, which is pretty amazing. I want to highlight just a couple here. Question 1 related to being aware of at least one learning resource, and that question went from below 20% all the way up to everyone getting that one right. So that's kind of cool. Questions 2 and 3 saw some pretty minimal increases, but I think the incoming knowledge of my participants was a lot higher than I expected. I might expect a different result had this been out to the general public. But overall, I saw some pretty noticeable increases, and I'm very happy to see that. Next, let's take a look at how the attitudes of my participants changed before and after listening. So participants were also asked 5 subjective questions, and I'll read this off very quickly. I am familiar with computer science as a school subject. It's important for elementary school students to learn computer science in school. I'm aware of resources that can aid a child's computer science education, and I want to be able to support my child learning computer science. Oh, and 5th, I enjoy podcasts. So this one, we can see increases in every question as well. I can't share everything, but I'll highlight a few. Question 3 is, again, being aware of resources, has the largest increase of 31% and directly correlates to one of my instructional goals. And question 5, I thought it'd be fun to ask if people just enjoyed listening to podcasts more. And it's good affirmation for me to see that just after one listening, people overall, 15% enjoyed podcasts a bit more. So that's kind of fun. Finally, let's take a look at what my participants thought. Did they like it? Did they find it useful? Was it easy to use? Let's take a look. So I won't read all of these time around, but each of these questions had a maximum score of 5, and most items scored above a 4. That last question was graded a little differently, question 7. It's about the length of the podcast. It was interesting to see that it's 3 out of 5, which is just right. Some people thought it was too long. Some people thought it was too short. But they all canceled out in the end, and I guess 20 minutes is the perfect length, which is also the length of this talk and the average length of a TED Talk. Fun fact. So the results were very positive. And now that you've seen the data, it's time for me to wrap things up. So let's tie a bow on everything we've covered so far. To revisit the intent of the project, the goal was to incentivize and bolster computer science interest in elementary school children. If children start early and are encouraged by their caretakers, they are more likely to pursue computer science in their future education and career. The method was not to instruct children directly, but instead to focus on parental education. This fosters an appropriate environment at home and supplements a child's instruction at school. And finally, the solution must accommodate the lives of busy parents, giving them the flexibility to consume it whenever they prefer. And it must also be naturally incentivizing for them to want to do it in the first place. So the solution that adjusted with and aligned best with all these principles was a podcast. And the results support these theories by showing high retention of information post-instruction. It also shows that participants genuinely enjoyed learning from the podcast. So, this project was successful in accomplishing its 2 instructional goals. Evaluation results show increases in the awareness of computer science and its benefits, and it also provided guidance on how parents could better support their children by making them aware of at least one coding resource as a starting point. So, while I did run into a few small hurdles, I'm impressed with the success of the project. If this project were to continue, I think the only thing to be done is to create more episodes and more content. If I follow a similar formula, I can expand on the topics that I had to cut due to time, and I'm sure if I put in the time, they would do well as well. So I just want to close by saying one final thing. Hawaiian culture celebrates learning through legend, and humans evolved telling stories to each other about the past. It's a very natural way to learn, and nuanced discussions are difficult to have in other traditional forms of instruction, but through guided speech in a podcast can be explored in ways that are both thought-provoking and thorough. So going through this classical instructional design process in its entirety and producing a successful product has reinforced the idea for me that solid research can bear prosperous fruits. So I want to thank you all for listening and give a special thanks to my professors, critical friends, and the participants who helped me with this project. It was a pleasure to share my journey. Aloha and mahalo, everybody.
Thank you so much, Sawyer. That was wonderful. Congratulations. And I think I will leave it to you to facilitate our question and answer session.
Sure. So yeah, I guess I'll open up the floor. If anyone has questions, please feel free to type them in the chat.
I've got a question for you, Sawyer. So,
All right, go ahead.
you were talking about informing parents of computer science in schools, but did you think about maybe including motivation, so like getting them excited about computer science, or was it just purely informational podcast?
Sure. So again, I wanted to appeal to a broad audience. And at the beginning of my project, I actually did have a couple of concerns about parents who might be kind of against computer science, education in general. So I was struggling on how to balance between motivating parents, convincing parents, and just kind of giving them some broad knowledge. And what I discovered is that I think a lot of parents know a lot about computer science, or at least think it's beneficial in some way. And so I kind of wanted to hone in on that specifically. And to the parents who kind of disagreed with, computer science education or didn't want it taken up time in schools, well, instead of trying to convince them, I tried to go with the approach of giving them some overwhelmingly positive benefits so that, even they wouldn't be able to deny that it would probably be helpful for their kids. So that's kind of the approach I took. But great question. Thank you very much. Can take maybe one or two more. If anyone has any questions. And if you guys don't, that just means I did a good job presenting. So.
Hey, Sawyer. I'm curious
Go for it.
if you could talk a little bit more about the technology and tools you use to create, your podcast, and if there were any that you recommend that worked well or didn't work well.
Sure. So I hadn't really done some formal, podcasting before. I had a couple of equipment to use, but in terms of the technical side, it was a pretty big learning curve for me to at least find the tools, to host a website, record a podcast audio, and like send it out through an RSS feed. That was a little bit new to me, but wasn't too difficult. If there was one piece of technology that I thought was super cool that I only got to use 30 days of because that's when the trial ended, it's something called Descript. It's actually a phenomenal podcasting tool. It can take all the text and transcribe it to script. And when you're editing the podcast, you can kind of edit it like a Word document, and it would automatically adjust the audio that way. It also had some really cool tools like being able to build your own AI voice. So if you made a mistake somewhere, you could have your AI voice kind of pitch in for you. So I had a lot of fun playing around with that, and I kind of want to use it more, but only got to dabble in. But really cool piece of technology.
Very cool. Congratulations. Any plans of hosting or disseminating more widely your podcast?
Well, it's currently available for free. It is hosted. If you're interested in taking a look, I could distribute it that way. In terms of formal advertising, maybe no, just word of mouth. But this overall project has given me pretty good insight into podcasting, and I'm kind of interested in starting perhaps a new thing of my own in the future. I'm still trying to figure out the topics, but I think this is a really useful piece of technology, and I think a lot of people can benefit from listening to podcasts.
Excellent. The reason why I asked about the technical things is because we need to learn from you as well. We are actually setting up a makerspace where there is going to be a podcasting station, so that anyone else in the future who wants to perhaps do podcasting, and you guys are welcome to as students, continuing students for the PhD program. Welcome to come and try it out as well. Thank you. Congratulations again.
Thanks for that, Dr. Peter.
Okay, I think we are going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening for Sawyer's presentation. We will continue to have LTech student presentations in this track, so you're welcome to just stay here You don't have to log off and log back on. We'll just stay here in this room, but you're welcome to log off and log back on if you're coming back to this track. On behalf of Learning Times, TCC Hawaii, and the Learning Design and Technology Department, I want to thank you all for joining us. And we will be